everyone, and welcome to Clocking In by PilieroMazza, Labor and Employment News for Government Contractors. My name is Nicole Atala, and I'm here with my partner,
Sarah Nash. Hi, everyone.
And today we are talking about TikTok. I know, just like all the young kids out there. Raise your hand silently at home if you wish you knew how to use it better. I do not. I'm not a good TikToker, but it's very important to federal contractors these days because if you have talked to any of your employees, they likely peruse through their TikTok videos on the regular. I know that many of my friends do, my nieces and nephews do. It's a big part of their life. But Sarah, what's happening in the world of TikTok and federal contractors that we need to know about?
Yeah, not great news for TikTok or people who love TikTok, but we're going to talk about it. So you might have heard that recently there was a FAR clause that is an interim rule, really, at this point, that was created at 52204-27. It was in response to an executive order that was issued, basically requiring some tamp down on employees and federal contractors' use of TikTok on devices that are used to perform federal work. And this interim rule, at least for the time being, has essentially made it a contract violation to have TikTok on certain contractor employee phones if they are used in the performance of a contractor. It has, in most cases, not gone into effect yet. There's a requirement that CEOs incorporate this clause into their contract by no later than July 3rd, which is coming up next week. Note to self, we should probably publish this before July 3rd. So hopefully we're getting to you in advance of that. TikTok, everyone. But yeah, it is broad reaching. We've received a lot of comments from clients saying, well, this doesn't apply to this type of employee, right? They can't possibly expect us, they understand. A lot of people have TikTok on their phones. But unfortunately, it's a pretty broad extension. And so if your employees are performing work on a government contract that's covered by this FAR clause, and they are using either their company phones or their personal cell phones to perform that work, they have to remove it from those devices. Again, the deadline or the upcoming deadline is going to be July 3rd. That's the date that a lot of CEOs are supposed to have incorporated this into their contracts. So you should be receiving modifications, if you haven't already, from your CEOs implementing this change. And generally, it should be, it's going to be painful for some of your employees, but it should be a relatively easy fix. Circulate some new changes to your code of ethics or your handbook, explaining that if you are using your cell phone to, in connection with these contracts, you need to be deleting TikTok. You need to not visit the TikTok website. And you can kind of imagine that this makes sense. We don't have great insight or transparency into how much of that information is available to China or available to others overseas. And so this is going in the direction of a lot of policies, just putting some limits on the risks that TikTok could get access. And I think, Nicole, that didn't Montana just promise to ban TikTok? For you, those of you who don't know, Nicole is a native Montanan. So I thought she might have some insight. But yeah, so states are doing it too.
Montana doesn't like China either, apparently. I asked my niece and nephew about this when I was visiting in May, and they were like, "What?" But in Montana, it's like a $10,000 violation if or fine. It's something crazy. Don't quote me on that, but it's something crazy. As Sarah alluded to, this is all because of China, right? And it's all because it's not like when employees ask, well, I'm not going to be doing anything like about work on TikTok. But the idea is that through TikTok, they can get access to your phone and anything in your phone. So it's not about TikTok in and of itself. And, the question I think is, well, how do we work this in? Well, if you've been paying attention to any of the prohibitions on using Chinese equipment, that should have worked its way into your code of ethics or your policies in some way, shape, or form. You should have an employee verification form that employees sign off and say, I have done a reasonable inspection of my modem and it's not made by Huawei or any of these companies that might be listed. And if you're not doing that, just give us a ring and we can talk about it. We've got some materials that might be helpful, but I would I'd roll this right into that kind of requirement. And the United States, as the federal government, is taking this like Chinese encroachment through technology issue very seriously. So I know it seems silly, like, come on, TikTok, but I actually think this is going to only ramp up in the next couple of years. And it's a good idea to figure out how you're going to work this into your standard processes.
Right. And you might get pushback, but you should circulate that certification. I think we have a draft knocking around if someone, would like a copy, that basically affirms that employees don't have it on their phone. They're not going to download it on their phone. They're not going to visit the prohibited website on their phone, et cetera, et cetera. And it'll probably be one of those things. It's painful at first because, people don't like when you encroach on their personal issues, but ultimately it should not be too heavy a lift. We've been working with our claims and appeals folks on this as well, and they don't immediately see any reason that this should lead to increased costs, but they did recommend, as you're implementing this policy, keep an eye out if there are, costs that maybe weren't anticipated, and you might be eligible for an equitable adjustment if that's the case.
Right, and it raises questions that I think are pertinent. Use of personal cell phones for business purposes versus cell phones being purchased for people to use as part of work, and keeping those two worlds very separate, which is a pain, but also can be very good about separating the personal stuff from the work stuff. And is an additional cost. And I think in the last 10 years, we've certainly seen a drift away from employer-provided devices and employees using their own devices so that they can use one. But it raises all sorts of fun issues that are outside the purview of this particular podcast. But, things like when you do silly things like harass people on your business phone, or your phone is subject to confiscation and litigation because you've used it for personal purposes, even if the litigation is personal employee litigation. Time spent on phone as a wage and hour issue, and compensating employees for the use of those personal devices, which in many states, Washington State, California, DC, I think, there are regulations that say you're actually supposed to compensate employees for the use of their personal devices. So it is, not to go into all of those things, which I already did, I know, but it's, again, a time maybe to pause and think, should we be doing it this way?
Well, it is a good point, because when you're controlling what employees can have on their personal cell phones, I think that's likely going to trigger some complaints where people start saying, well, what do I get out of this? Or like, I'm using my personal phone. So there could be a risk that in spreading this certification, people are going to start asking questions about, how they are paid as a part of their use of their personal cell phone devices. It's probably a good opportunity to dust off those policies and take a look.
Right. So who would have thought we would be talking about TikTok and federal government contracting, but post-COVID, we got to find a few things to talk about. So that's what we're talking about.
It's relevant.
No, it is relevant. It is important. And, these are the things that people complain about, right? And so it's important for you to know and figure out how you're going to implement it. And we are happy to help if you need anything in that regard. But otherwise, thanks for tuning in today. Don't forget to let us know if you have any other topics you would really like us to cover in preferably 10 minutes or less. We don't make that promise for everything, but we're really going to try hard. So.
We'll try. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.